And Paul approached me about cannabis and said that there are some really interesting opportunities in this business. I'm a businessman myself, and I paid attention to him. I'm an educator by trade, and one of the reasons I'm passionate about cannabis is because I have seen so many black and brown children incarcerated over something that's about to be federally legalized. And I'm old enough to know that we ought to get our piece of this industry. And that is why I'm here. And that's why Paul is here. So without further ado, Mr. Paul McLean.
Thank you. Can everyone, okay. I don't want to hold it like an MC. That's habit. How's everybody doing this morning? Thank you. I'm glad to see you all. I feel very appreciative for another day of life, health, and strength to come out here and talk about cannabis, because this is something, this event has been on my mind for a long time. This is something that I've been working towards being able to bring to the community for a long time. And we're going to talk about some stuff today that you're not going to hear people talk about in a lot of other places. You're going to hear some things said today that you're not going to hear on the news. And I want you to understand that all of this information comes from a place of creating opportunity for black and brown people to get into this industry. Why do I want to do that? Because I've seen what this industry can do for people. I'm a graduate of Hampton University, Ogre 8, class Ogre 8, love it to death. But I had right out the gate when cannabis opened up in California, Colorado, in Washington, I had classmates that got into the industry at the beginning. Some of them have since made their money, sold their business, and moved on. Some still function in that space. But either way, I had been doing research. Every time I would travel out near them, I would go see them, visit, hang out. But I was always researching the business, curious about what they were doing, because I knew at some point it was coming to Virginia. And I realized that if it was coming, the more prepared I was, the better off I could be to get into the industry. Now, that's kind of how it came about, but let's talk a little bit more. See, I'm telling you the story of how this came about because this is not what I was expecting to do in cannabis. I was expecting to come into the industry and be a business owner, probably in dispensary or possibly cultivation or possibly lab testing because of my science background. But when I started going through the process of just learning, I was just learning. And about 4 years ago, I had a client at the time, and I was representing them on a real estate development project with the city of Hampton. And it was an eye-opening experience because twice a month, I met with the city manager. Well, it was not just me, but a group of people that had buildings in this office park. We met with the city officials twice a month for 2 years. Don't you think you get to know somebody after meeting them twice a month for 2 years? Got to know them. And, one day I'm driving to this meeting, and I stop at the 7-Eleven to get some coffee. And I happen to look down. You know how they had the little newspaper stand right there? It said Virginia had just issued the first 5 licenses for cannabis. I was like, what? Because I was in a meeting 2 weeks earlier, and the city officials said there was no intention of ever having anything in cannabis in the city. We are not going to do that. We don't want that, blah, blah, blah. So that got my attention. So when I got to that meeting, you best believe I had some questions that weren't on the agenda. So when I got a chance to ask my questions, I started asking, what was the city doing? And that was a moment of clarity, like Talib Kweli likes to say. Because in that moment, they told me, yeah, we've already set up zoning. It's designated here, here, here. What does that tell you? The game was already being played. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know the rules. And so that bothered me. So I started making some phone calls, and I agitated a lot of people. And over the course of 2 days, I made a lot of phone calls. And at the end of that 2 days, I ended up talking to the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Virginia. And I started asking some questions simply because I heard about these 5 licenses, and they were medical licenses, and they weren't sharing much detail, but I only had one question. Are black people factored into this? And I didn't get an answer. not because they didn't want to answer, it's because it was obvious that it never crossed their mind and they had never been asked that question, so I was putting them on the spot. So we had a conversation, and after that, I was invited to participate in the work group process with the old governor and worked involved with that. Through that process is how I learned a lot of things about the behind the scenes of the state process to this, but also I ended up meeting some awesome people along this journey that have been very instrumental in me learning a lot, but also building a network for people that come through the coalition to capitalize on and to be a member and to take advantage of the resources that they bring. Like Lock Green, the company here. I met Sarah at the Normal event. Tamara, I met her at that Normal event. You see what I'm saying? And I was blown away by the portraits. As a matter of fact, I just purchased her book. If you all have not purchased that book, I challenge you to sit down and read that book and not cry. And then Columbia Care, I ended up meeting a young lady by the name of Nagista Bibi. And for those of you that don't know, Columbia Care is a medical MSO. And because of the miseducation of people in cannabis, there's a lot of people out here talking about MSOs are the death of this industry. What they don't realize is the MSOs are the reasons why I can pay for stuff and give it to my community for free. You see the difference there? A lot of people don't understand that. But I want you guys to understand that who we're going to bring to you, if you choose to become a member of the coalition, our whole purpose is to create on-ramps for people to get into this industry, not just in business ownership, but also employment. All right, and we'll talk more about that at another time. Our mission, I kind of explained that. What is social equity inclusion? That word social equity, I want to talk about that briefly because you're going to hear more about that over the course of the day. But you got to understand something. That term, social equity, scares a lot of white politicians. You got to understand why it scares politicians, period. Because that word, those words have been taken and misused. It's not about someone giving anything. It's about having opportunity, but equal opportunity. And we will talk a lot more about that over the course of the day. But everybody out here has a right to be part of this industry. That's your right. However, not everyone has the ability to participate in the industry fairly. Now, that word fair can be dangerous because it often means people perceive it as being given something. That's not what we're talking about here. It's been proven, it's already known. In the black and brown community, we go through more challenges to get financing, not just personally, but especially for business. That same thing will happen in this industry if we don't do something about it. And that is our mission, to make sure that that's not an issue. And I didn't share, my background is in advertising, marketing, banking, and real estate development. So I used to be the guy selling the money. So I want to bring that knowledge to our community because a lot of things that people are challenged with in other states that are in the black community trying to get into this industry, we don't have the same mechanisms in place here in Virginia, so we don't have to deal with all of the same nonsense. However, we got to deal with some Virginia-specific stuff, and we're going to talk about that today. Why 33%? You see the people here with the 33% on their T-shirt. Why we talk about 33%? Because if you look at arrest rates for Virginia over the last 20-plus years, it's like this. Now, I'm going to get deep on you, okay? So listen to what I'm saying. There have been, correct way to phrase this, more Caucasian people are arrested for marijuana possession in the state of Virginia than black people. But if you are black, you are 4 times more likely to serve time. Now think about what I just said. Those numbers. Do you understand the significance there? There's a lot of things that go into that. Those things that go into that are the things that our organization is bringing attention to get people to understand if we don't make this change, if we don't demand and request this change, it is not going to change. Raise your hand if that makes sense. All right, good deal. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, I want to talk about the panel here. I'm going to bring up our panelists, if our panelists can come on up. Okay, good deal. Thank you. You're on the other side, John. Other side. No, Breon's. Okay. You can come on up, Sarah. I'm going to hand this to you in just a second. I'm going to turn this microphone over to the moderator in just a moment, but I want to introduce our guests so you understand who we have here. First, you heard him speak earlier, Dr. John Hodge. He is the president of ULLC, a consultancy here in the state of Virginia. But I want you to understand why I have all of these people here. Dr. Hodge, having a background in education and me knowing him for 20 plus years, being a business associate and business partner in the past, I trust him. But one of the things that I love about him is his family has been rooted in education for 40 plus years. And whenever we have talked about teaching, training, and empowering the community, he has always been a valuable asset. On top of that, just this whole issue of the stigma of cannabis, we've had numerous conversations, hours of dialogue because of how significant it is. You have Pastor Nelson here, Dr. Nelson. Met him. He came to our Columbia Care tour. He has been to the Columbia Care facility, has seen the behind the scenes of the industry. The reason why I have him here is because when we came to that tour and we got a chance to talk, he got it. I've talked to probably 100 faith leaders up to this point, and there's about 5 of them that get it. And I have enjoyed the conversation with him, but he has an understanding of this industry and how it can be a gateway for people in our community to move up to another level of income. So I love to have him here, and thank you for your time. Sheba Williams. Yeah, give him a round of applause. Sheba Williams. Met her also through Columbia Care and doing events. Sheba has been very instrumental and involved in the legislative process in the state, and she's going to be talking later on today. When she does her talk later on today, if you're not ready to run out and do something, I'm not going to say you're going to be very motivated after that talk today based on what's happening in the state in the last week. So I appreciate Sheba coming down because she has been involved with working with expungement, working with the legalities, working with the politicians, and she has been a translator for me for a lot of the nonsense. That's not what I was about to say, but I'm remembering where I am. A lot of the nonsense that we will deal with and we have been dealing with the politics. Thank you. Tamara Netzel. I got a chance to meet Tamara at the Normal event, and actually first time we met was at the first tour I did at Columbia Care, and I met her there, met her husband, and I got a chance to learn about her organization. And she has the portraits that you see in the back there. And then at the Normal event, I got a chance to meet one of the people featured in her book. And I was blown away by someone taking time out of their life to be able to help other people, because not many people do that out here. And on top of that, you know, she has her own story, her own medical story that she will talk about, I'm sure, at some point. But she has been very instrumental in bringing awareness to how people in our community and just people, period, that have dealt with the justice system have been mistreated and how it's a system mistreating people. So that's why I asked her to be here. Breon Case is a youth pastor, and he is also an intern at Columbia Care. He's been very helpful for me. But I asked him to be on this panel because with him being a youth pastor, and he invited a couple pastors to the tour that we did. But the reason I wanted Breon to be here and to be on this panel is because of the age. Because let's talk about that stigma. The stigma of cannabis, in my opinion, is going to be what causes our community to completely miss out on this opportunity. Because we are going to be standing on the corner waiting for the bus that's going to take us to the train station, arguing over if it's morally right to be involved in cannabis. The law has said that it's legal, but we will have that debate while other communities didn't get on the bus. They took a cab to the train station. They already on the train, and it's leaving. There is about an 18-month window of time here to seize this opportunity, and then it's gone. That's why we're doing this event, hoping to empower and educate people. The stigma of cannabis will rob us all of opportunity because it keeps us from going after what we should be going after. And I'm going to talk more about that, but that's why this is addressed towards the stigma. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Morton here, founder of Lock Green, and I will shut up.
Okay. Makes sense. Hello, good morning, everybody. All right, people who know me know it's not good to give me a mic standing up, so I might sit down or I might stand up, but I appreciate you guys being here, and I'm so happy to be here this morning. As Paul mentioned, my name is Sarah Kaya Morton. I am the CEO and co-founder of Lot Green. Lot Green provides products that provide protection to and support the values of responsible consumers of cannabis. We're most known for our smell-proof stash boxes that have a built-in lock, and that is to protect kids and other unwanted guests from getting into your stash, but also to help prevent open container violations in your car when you travel with cannabis. Just a quick education note, if you travel with cannabis in your car in Virginia, it needs to be where? Does anybody know? In your trunk. And it's best if it is locked up because it's sealed. The law is very clear in Virginia that it should be in your trunk, and the best way to travel with it being locked up is so that the cops can't assume that you were consuming while driving. So our company does a lot of education to the community about cannabis laws because our goal is to prevent people from getting law violations, which cause records, which cause fines, possibly jail time. That's our mission, to prevent that through our education and also through our products. Okay, so that's what we do. Now, I was born and raised in the church, in a Missionary Baptist Church in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm born and raised. And then I've also been a part of Virginia's cannabis community since about 2017. And yes, there was a very small group of us talking about cannabis in Virginia at that time. So I understand the dichotomy of both worlds. That's why I think this panel is going to be so important today for us to talk to and learn from. And you know, that stigma is very important to address, and we're going to do that today. Now, before I jump into the panel, how we're going to do this is I have questions. The panelists have all been given these questions that I'm going to throw out to the panel. It's not directed at any one person, so anyone answer it. And we're going to go through those questions, and we want to hear as many perspectives as possible. We're going to do that to about 10, 15 or so. We're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for you all to ask questions. We're here to learn. We're here to gain perspective. So I encourage you all to get those questions together and really take advantage of the wealth of knowledge that you have in front of you today. All right, y'all ready? First question, throwing out to the panel. All right. The illicit U.S. cannabis market in 2019 was estimated to be worth $66 billion. That's a billion with a B. That same year, Virginia state officials estimated that Virginia's legacy market accounted for $2.1 billion of that 66. So just for clarification, when we mention illicit market or legacy market, or you may hear black market sometimes, that means the street, people selling weed on the streets. The market that already exists despite prohibition, okay? So in the US, it was estimated $66 billion. In Virginia, $2.1 billion of that 66. So there's big money in this, you guys. To the panel, how can the BIPOC community and Black, Indigenous, people of color community overcome the moral landmines planted by the war on drugs to avoid missing out on the economic opportunities of the cannabis industry? Who wants to start us off? Sheba, I see you reaching.
Y'all being shy. I know Tamara's gonna jump
Don't be shy,
in.
don't be shy.
Good morning. My name is Sheba Williams, and I, have been born and raised in Richmond, Virginia my whole life. The war on drugs is something that will plague us for years to come. It is not over by any means. It still continues, and we know that by how our administration right now, yesterday, is fighting to make sure that criminalization is placed first in this community when we're talking about cannabis. But our responsibility is to assist people with building their business plans, be educated about this plant and the dynamics of what it will take to build generational wealth the way that it's intended to be. We typically avoid the conversation because we have been told that this plant is criminal. Everything about it is criminal. But if we think about how the medical market comes in, and if we being all the way honest, my granddad in 2012 was diagnosed with lung and stomach cancer, and he had lost so much weight. I was living down here in Tidewater. I was going to Norfolk State. And when I came home and I saw him, I said, hey, we got to roll up for you. And my grandfather passed in 2012, and the statute of limitations is over for that, so I will share freely. But cannabis was the only thing that gave him an appetite and gave him some relief from the pain that he felt. Same thing happened with my mom. She was going through chemo and radiation last year, and she did not have an appetite. Cannabis is what gave her some relief from the pain and some relief from that chemo and radiation that was supposed to help her and ultimately ended up killing her anyway. But we have to move away from the notion that cannabis is something to be ashamed of. And it is something that we should not benefit from, because while we're arguing about whether or not our community should indulge in this, the world is passing us by and making billions of dollars off of this. So,
I'll just add to that. I'm Tamara Netzel, founder of Cruel Consequences, Portraits of Misguided Law. And I guess I would break this down into really understanding what are those moral landmines of the war on drugs. And that's what my organization tries to do, is educate about those. We're not just a collection of stories of people who've been criminalized. Each story has a specific theme, if you will, or something to address with cannabis education. And I think the answer to this question is more education, because we need to focus more on the education. I know that people are anxious about getting, into the industry and making money, but I think that there's a lot of people in Virginia that still don't know about cannabis, still don't know it's legal, still don't even know there's medical. And I think people in the cannabis community, we think we're ready, we're ready to go. But I think that we still need to do a lot of that education, and just understanding the medicinal benefits and that. So we're somewhat getting ahead of ourselves. At educate, we can't forget that legalization did not educate. It didn't. There's a lot it didn't do. And I guess my answer to that is we need to focus on the education. I know the industry is coming, and I know people are anxious, but that education is so important.
Anyone else want to add to that?
As I said earlier, I'm an older person, 60s, 70s person, and I remember what heroin did to my neighborhood. Cannabis is not heroin, but the way it's being marketed and portrayed all the time is that it's equal to or just as. What I find amazing in being a student of history is that things always become a bigger issue at the point which black and brown people might benefit. And that is a fundamental, I love my country, but that's a fundamental problem here. I also want to tell you that if you are here to learn about business, I've been in business for myself since 2003. And one of the first meetings I went to was about contracts to provide services in the state of Virginia. And in reading the material, I thought, man, I better get there early. It's going to be a big crowd, right? And I got to this meeting about contracts to serve the Commonwealth of Virginia, and there were 2 of us there. So we're so conditioned to buy, we never think about ownership and owning our own businesses. And I think that would benefit our communities and actually benefit the country if we start thinking that way. So I'm really happy and proud of you who came out today and to hear more about what this industry can build.
Thank you, thank you. So, Dr. Hodge spoke about heroin and other drugs, which is a perfect lead up into the next question. The word marijuana has racial implications and has a polarizing impact on people, especially in the black community. However, when you hear alcohol, Percocet, Zoloft, and others, they do not garner that same response from the community. So the question to the panel, why don't the anti-cannabis haters in the African American community apply the same stigma to the very addictive, over-prescribed prescription meds doctors and dentists give to patients that in some cases kill them, by the way? Anybody want to pick that one up?
I'll do that. I think for this, pop culture has normalized these other substances. And it's even, I would even say that it's normalized in that to their party drugs, as party drugs for euphoria, and we they sing about it in songs, but do you hear many singing about marijuana? Do you? Or cannabis? You don't. Maybe, I've thought about this, maybe it's because of the shame that's still there. People are remembering the shame. We need to be talking about this and not being ashamed of it. I was raised Catholic, but I converted to Seventh-day Adventist in my adult life, and I just remember one quote. I think it's Matthew. But it's a city on a hill cannot hide. And what it says, I'm a Christian. As a Christian, if I have good news and I have truth, I should not hide it. I should not be ashamed of it. So the fact that cannabis, it truly did save my life. And because I will briefly tell you, I have multiple sclerosis and was taking the traditional medications until those medications made my liver go into failure. And then I couldn't take any medications, and I was relying on 10 to 15 different medications just to cover the symptoms. So at that point, it's not so much that cannabis helped me with my pain, but at that point, when I didn't know about cannabis, I was faced with a progressive disease with no help. So that sent me into a depression. Now, cannabis gives me hope. It gives me hope that I can move and I can, live my life where otherwise it wasn't. So that's why I say it saved my life, because there's a high statistic for people with multiple sclerosis that commit suicide. I will tell you that. But I just believe, as a Christian, I have the truth, and I can't keep quiet about it, and we shouldn't keep quiet about it. So when we're talking about these other drugs, it's our job to overturn that and that stigma. Why is it that we're glorifying these other drugs and they're okay? We shouldn't be ashamed of if you have a past with cannabis, and we shouldn't be shaming others for having a past if they've been arrested or if they have, and part of my job in telling these stories, unintended, is I always tell everyone that I approach to do their story, I say, I may never be able to help you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not be able to help you with your case. But I can tell your story, and your story will help others. But most of my portrait participants have come back to me and said, that's not true. You have helped me. You've helped me hold my head up high. You've helped me be able to tell my story without shame. And so that's my mission, is to be able to be that city on the hill and not hide.
So you found that value when other people devalued cannabis. So talk to me more, panelists. Why do we hold these prescription medicines up to such a standard, but yet we're still dogging, if you will, cannabis and all of the things that are great about it?
I think it's because we were all raised to trust doctors. That's one issue, right?
Go.
So when we get a prescription from a doctor, you feel like this is a trusted source. But start listening to the millions, I'm exaggerating, but all of the commercials you see on television about medication. And at the very end of those commercials, you'll hear the side effects. You know, so it'll say something like, well, this will cure your headache, but you won't be able to walk tomorrow. Like something extreme, right? But just listen to the side effects. And that tells us that many of the prescriptions that we are using are toxic. And you're talking to a person who's lost 40 pounds in the last year and a half because I went plant-based, right? Just as a health choice. I'm telling you, not everything that you get from a doctor is best for you. So when I step to my doctor now, I do it as a partner because what I want is wellness. I don't just want to be in good health. I want to be well, you know, mentally and physically. And I think that the fact that we're conditioned to just follow anything a doctor says is part of the stigma. The other stigma is, even in places where it is legalized, members of our community are so threatened by the legal system that we act like we're still using something that's illicit. I mean, it's weird. It's really weird. Like it doesn't. You go to a legal place, and you'll notice that we're just so conditioned. And I love what you said. We need to start talking to each other about what this can do for us, economically and medically. And I've found it to be most effective, especially if you're talking to folks over 60, to do it one-on-one. Just have a heart-to-heart and just say, hey, here's what's happening. You go in front of a crowd, you might get a little uncomfortable, but one-on-one. And people, when you say this has really worked for me and helped me, then it changes the conversation. I think the more of us that we're willing to do that, the better off we will all be.
I want us to be real about the narrative spinning. We are taught to believe that black is wrong and white is pure, even in the Bible. In the Bible, this is what we are taught. So when we are talking about the stigma of marijuana, we know that alcohol in excess is just as dangerous as anything that is prescribed by a doctor. But you see it in clubs, you see it held up high and proud. Nobody talks about the death rate of people who die from alcoholism and kidney failure and all of the things. But with cannabis, we are made to believe that this is something that should be shunned by the public. And if you are black or if you are justice involved or justice impacted, that you should not benefit from what has torn down our communities. Because let's be real about what's happening to people. When Nixon came and said, we'll take away your highway federal funding if you don't arrest as many people as possible. And that still stands today. A lot of people don't know that federal highway funding is still tied to the war on drugs based on something that happened back in the 60s, even though Reagan was pushing cocaine through our borders. It was flowing through with no problem. But it comes with the messenger. It starts with who is pushing the message. We are told that alcohol and prescription medication is the best thing for us. And nobody publicized and made a news conference about Virginia securing the largest settlement from the pharmaceutical companies of $508 million this year, because the messenger says that is who is right. So the spinning of the narrative is a lot of reason why we don't hear a lot about cannabis, even though cannabis goes back as old as our Indian culture who started this nation. We have to stop allowing people to spin the narrative that we should not benefit from this plant. And I say plant because that is what it is. It is not enriched by anything other than nature when you first get cannabis, but alcohol is, Zoloft is, Percocets are. Man-made things that have the best advertisement are what is leading our nation to make us believe that it is acceptable, right? So we have to pay attention to who's telling the story and who's made out to be the good guy versus the bad guy, because The alcohol industry and all of the prescription pharmaceuticals are predominantly led by white America. And if we're looking at the path of what cannabis is taking, when black people and brown people stand up and say, we should benefit what has torn down our communities for years, and it's not just by locking up our brothers and sisters, we're talking about disinvestment from playgrounds, parks and recs, housing. That gentrification that happened takes a look back at the census that looks over a 10-year period to say, who is making the least amount of income and who can we come in and take their homes? That is intentional. We have to make sure that we fight for what we need, what we deserve, and what we have been disallowed to benefit from for centuries.
I love it.
I want to also add, everybody here knows alcohol was once illegal, right?
Yep.
And then it was legalized. And companies grew from the legalization of alcohol. And none of those companies were owned by us at all. I also want to say is, when you're starting to talk about this industry, it might feel a little bit alone, you might feel alone, but there's a lot of white people and a whole lot of black people who are on your side to make things right and to give you an opportunity to have a chance in this industry. And that's something you need to keep in mind moving forward. Bottom line for me, I just hate the idea of yet another industry becoming legalized and so much revenue being possible and we not participate in that process.
Yeah, I would just like to add to a lot of the comments that have already been shared relating to, the hatred that is attached to the African American community when it comes to this is, again, I think two key points that have already been said but can't fail to be emphasized enough is the continued need for education. The education of our people and of all people as it relates to the cannabis industry. My personal testimony is I came initially with my own biases and stigmas, but I was open to being educated and having conversations with my sons, who one is 19 and one 14, and being open in terms of parenting and personal journey of, after a series of bouts with my wife seeking treatment for migraine headaches, but then started looking at alternatives because after MRIs and CAT scans, everything the doctors were prescribing wasn't working for her. And then it was the suggestion of a friend, have you ever considered? And that conversation led to us considering and then now finding medical treatment that is working. And so I think now, for us as a faith leader, it is starting to be pushing these conversations in every sector of our communities. We need to be pushing the conversation. It starts by having gatherings like this today that we want to begin to encourage our faith leaders and others to be a part of these conversations, members of our various groups this conversation, starting the conversation and sharing the stories, because we've only heard one narrative. We've only heard the narrative of the recreational side of it and the narrative that has been spent with that, but we seldom hear the medical side, the medical benefits and all of those things in that other side of that narrative. And I think it's just going to take more of us beginning to push these conversations in our churches, in various parts of our communities, with our families, with our teens, across the generations, to begin to help combat the narrative that is being portrayed in this industry. And I think it starts with starting the conversations, having the conversations, and having faith leaders and others who have the courage. A lot of these things we all deal with. We have members of our congregations and all of this stuff that, I say, people don't want to talk about sex and money and all of that stuff, but it's the main things that people are doing behind closed doors and want more of, but nobody wants to have the conversations. So it takes somebody having the conversation, the nerve and the courage to have the conversations that I think begins to change the narrative within our context.
And just talking about it, but I love what you said, courage, because a lot of us early people talking about cannabis, we've had to have courage in a lot of those conversations, a lot of those rooms that we were in. So that's really good. And I really love what she said about it being just a plant, which is very important. Remember, it's just a plant that grows out the ground, you guys. And that really leads us to talking about cannabis as a medicine, right? So cannabis is not viewed as a medicinal medicine by the Black community in many circles. I think we get it, right? We get it. But to the folks that we're talking to, cannabis has been used as a morality weapon, as we've talked about throughout today, by everyone other than the cannabis users for almost 100 years. Part of that war on drugs. Paul and I were talking, the best propaganda campaign there has been for a while, I would say. That's across the United States and across the world, this war on cannabis specifically. Question to the panel is, what are some ways the people who have dealt with the legal system for cannabis possession can develop confidence that the community will support their entrepreneurial efforts? And I just want to tie this into what Dr. Hodge said before, because you spoke about people are still talking about what they're doing is wrong, even though it's legalized in Virginia. And talk about what all the other panelists have said about having support and having courage. So what are some of those ways that the people who have dealt with the legal system for cannabis possession can develop confidence that the community will support their entrepreneurial efforts?
So I'll just repeat what I said earlier, is a city on a hill does not hide. And if you missed that, it means that myself as a Christian, hide the truth. And I'm gonna tell everybody I can. I'm not gonna hide that cannabis helps me. And somebody that's been affected by the war on drugs, I think the answer is to build that trust through the education. Show the community that you know what you're talking about. There are hundreds of other cannabinoids other than THC. Know that. I mean, it just takes Google, do some research, do some looking up, reading, and understanding, because I know myself, medicinally, THC is not my number one cannabinoid. I have to have many others, to really function, and so just know that there's so much out there that you just have to start looking, and that building that trust, somebody that's has that past, I think it starts with the education and showing that you have that trust in the community. Show them you have something, and then that trust will then, you'll get the support of the community.
I gotta ask y'all, are we a nation of redemption and acceptance? I'm not a person who has a cannabis conviction, but I do have legal contact. And it should not have to impact you directly for you to take a stance and support the people who have been through the carceral systems. I need us as a community to embrace people and not require through incarceration for, and support their efforts for economic empowerment and growth. Because the first thing that that scarlet letter of a felony does is take away your ability to earn income for your family. And if you have not been directly impacted by handcuffs, your tax dollars have paid for Virginia lawyer in this state. The onerous should not lie on people who have past convictions or past charges, because let's be clear, your Virginia state background covers your arrest record, not just your conviction record. And that means that if you are found innocent in a court of law before we got expungement passed in 2021, that thing followed you forever, and it led you to be denied housing, education, employment, the ability to be a foster parent, the ability to chaperone your children on field trips, the ability to be a recipient of a donor organ, not a person who gave their organs, but if you had a past conviction of certain types, you may be denied a life-saving treatment. So let's talk about the humanity of this and not put the onerous on people who have already had justice involvement and already lost time from their family and communities. Let's put the onerous on us as a community to support those people. I beg of you to not be the person who stands by until it comes directly to your door, but to step outside that stoop and fight for everybody in your community to be a part of this conversation and to grow economically from what we are about to embark on with this cannabis conversation.
Hey, Sheba, I'm going to throw something back to you specifically in regards to that. So you've seen people with your organization, No Left Turns, who have come out of jail and they're trying to reestablish back into the community, correct? So for those people who have experienced coming out, maybe even in this audience and listening and saying, I want to take advantage of this economic opportunity, we know that your organization does that specifically, showing them support. But with that, I would even say generational community trauma that comes along with it, how do we as a community support those people so that they feel comfortable enough jumping into this entrepreneurial effort or job effort? Job opportunity, rather, excuse me.
If you are in position to employ those people without harping on what that past is. If you can look at the skill, and let's be honest, every application in America, except for a mortgage application, asks about a criminal record. We have a thing in Virginia called ban the box. Ban the question, don't just ban the box. Ask a person what their skill is and how they can benefit your company. If you are a housing manager, don't expect a person to wait 5, 7, 10, 20, 99 years to find affordable and comfortable housing. Because this housing crisis that we're in right now means that people who don't have records are being pushed out, but people who do have records are being pushed out even further. If we care about homelessness enough that when a person says that they don't have a home, we wrap around and give them all of the things and we set up food pantries. Look at it in the same way. Drop the judgment and increase the access for all people. Because what we do in our organization is make sure that people have their civil rights reinstated so that they can, we make sure that they have permanent, safe, and affordable housing. And we make sure that they can reunite with their families and be an active, because we got to stop using that term that people have to be productive members of society. Prison is violence. And if we are shamed about behavioral health the same way that we're ashamed about cannabis, let's talk about that. In this community, in our communities, we have missed the opportunity for treatment so many times because we have a stigma around behavioral health. It is the exact same thing with cannabis. We are told by media that our kids are just being bad. That ADHD that another kid is diagnosed with and they get treatment and wraparound services is, and I know this because I used to work at a group home that focuses on foster care, behavioral health, and kids who are coming from Department of Juvenile Justice. They provide all these wraparound services for people who are diagnosed properly. But in our communities, we told they just being bad. So when the police put handcuffs on them and lock them in locked facilities, we accept that as the norm. We have to break these cycles. We have to start having these conversations with our own communities and demanding that others who make the decisions for us listen and take account to what we are demanding. We're not asking to be at the table. We are pushing our way through the doors and saying this is something that belongs to us as we have built this nation on our backs for years.
I love the question and I love the response. I taught my first class in 1989. So you just kind of do the math on that. I want to talk about what happens when we don't do what Sheba was just talking about, and we don't welcome kids who have had records back home or back into the community. It's the most heartbreaking thing, one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever had said to me by a former student. We were in Newport News, saw him out, asked him how he was doing, and he told me, Mr. Hodge, I'm more comfortable in prison. And he was 19 years old. That's what happens. That's what happens when young men and women have an incident and they're not welcomed back home into our communities. So I can't even help myself but to be an advocate just because I've seen how much children really have suffered. And they go into adulthood and something happened when they were 16 and it's following them when they're 36. And we ask them what's wrong. What's wrong with you? So that's why I'm here, and I'm learning as I participate, and I hope you are too. I think right is on our side. I really do.
Okay, so yeah, we got to stop stigmatizing cannabis, but also those folks with the record. We have to welcome them back to our communities because the world is against them. We got to welcome them back ourselves. You all talked about mental health, which was mental health is so important. Mental health and its impact on the family dynamic is one of the least talked about subjects in the African American community. How do we use mental health to bring about more discussion about cannabis in the African American community? Or do we think that cannabis and its impact on the human experience can help be that catalyst? And I would even direct that back to the pastors, using, in the churches, in our communities. How do we do that?
From my context, one, I think it is seeing, again, she mentioned the word wraparound services, that a lot of times in our communities, it's interesting where in other communities and other ethnicities, they go get these services and take full advantage of them. But a lot of times in our context, even taking advantage of those services is stigmatized. And so on my platform, I encourage our congregation, you need Jesus and a therapist.
Amen.
I was a middle school teacher for 16 years, and I'm a mom of 2 boys. So I see this as we should be encouraging, young people to do this, because I'll just talk about my friend Joe, who passed away this past November, but he helped me with my organization, and he inspired me. When legalization passed, he got so excited about, he was from Hampton, and he got so excited. He wanted us to go into a high school and start talking to the kids. And he just inspired me. You know, at first I thought, oh, well, you know, what's the message here? What are we saying? You know, and we have to be, delicate about this and that. But he was like, no, we have to go at it as, we need to inspire these kids that they could be the first generation to be full up, trained for a career from the ground up, and we need to inspire them to do that. And I believe that. I just feel like we shouldn't be inspiring our young people, and it might even inspire them to, in their studies and their school. Because if it's to a goal to be exciting, I said I taught for 16 years, and I was diagnosed with MS, and I used to tell my students, like, one of you are going to be so, you're so smart, you're going to come back to me one day, and you're going to have the cure for MS. And I would tease them. But I would say, if today I was teaching, I would say the same thing to kids. I would be like, you should be inspired by this. You could change people's lives, because there's so much science in this. There's so much to learn we don't even know yet. And just to think that young people could have the grasp of that, and from the ground up, it gives me chills, really.
And the time to do it is now. Sense of urgency. Sense of urgency. All right, you guys. Panel, that was great. I'm going to, at this time, turn it over to the audience. If anyone has any questions to ask of this phenomenal panel, like I said in the beginning, we're here to learn. We're here to open our minds. So what do you all have to say? Any questions you all have for the panelists? Yes. But in short, nothing right now. You can't do anything right now. In short. But yeah. Great question. Great question. Thank you for sharing your story.
Well, one of the things that I think we all, well, I've experienced like 2 or 3 times today, is when we share our stories, it builds strength. People start to hear, well, wow, I need to rethink how I'm thinking about this. So you sharing your story is a powerful thing. If you think about the people who've had a negative legal circumstance because of cannabis, when they say it out loud, what they did and what the punishment was, it sounds ridiculous. It really does. I mean, when they say it out loud, it's like, really? You got 7 years for that? And so I think that there's a power in being willing to share. Even though legislation is slow, knowing who represents you and being willing to make a phone call or send an email is huge. That is a big deal. Know who your representatives are. And with regard to school and education, it is very, very touchy right now because kids are being suspended and expelled because of cannabis. And it's still in the policy books that it is illegal. And so talking to your local board members about how you feel and what your experience has been can be a powerful thing. Also, with regard to kids coming out of high school, there's a big, millions of dollars are spent every year in Virginia on workforce development. Workforce development. And cannabis is nothing but another job opportunity. When we visited Columbia Care, the first people I saw were in lab coats. They were scientists. You know, their job was not cannabis, they were scientists, they were chemists. So there are job opportunities, and I think if you're uncomfortable, that's a real safe space to have a conversation about cannabis.
Good points. Any other questions?
That's my lane, that's my work. First of all, presumptions against illegal stop. Pretextual searches are legal, period. HB 79, the law passed, we fought for it, we advocated to make sure that it was not repealed. The police officers need to be reported to the FBI if they're not, the chain of command in that police station is not following that law, because it is illegal to stop and search a person for the smell of marijuana. And I use marijuana because that is what's in the code. Cannabis is the official word of it, but marijuana is what is in the code. Cannabis is considered a medical product. HB 79, House Bill 79, 2021 is what stopped pretextual searches. The legality of what it is you can possess up to 4, well, right now, it was 4 plants in your home. Now there is not a limit on what you can grow in your home. So if the police are inside of your home, not outside, if the police are not honoring this, take it up the chain of command in that police station. If they do not do what they're supposed to, file a complaint with the Internal Affairs Board. Take it to the FBI if you need to. But we have to know who we are electing in these positions, because the reason why we don't have retail sales market right now is because of the fight in the legislation for people who were undereducated, uneducated, and not willing to push further and advocate for legalization to be 100% what it needs to be. We oftentimes have to educate our legislators when they get in position about what we need in our communities. The same way we fight for street lights, the same way we fight for voting rights, the same way we fight for education dollars, we have to fight for this cannabis legalization to happen and benefit our communities that have been torn apart by the war on drugs for years. Show up at the General Assembly, talk to your representatives, and you can go to whoismylegislator.gov and search for who your legislators are, from everybody from city council to your governor. Your delegates, your senators, they are all accountable to you. And we'll talk about this later because I have my own panel, but vote, run, serve, lead. If they are not representing your interests, vote them out. Stand in position and get ready to fight. Support the people who are aligned with your values, not just the people who are aligned with the D or R. Because we have been given the okie doke about this D forever. It has to be the values that they support, not just the party that they are aligned with. Because I don't believe in the two-party system. I am the most outspoken person in my community when we say this. Don't just tell me what party you represent. Tell me what you're going to do to ensure that I am safe in my community. So it is really about the politics, and it's not just that 45 or 60 days that General Assembly is in session. We got to pay attention to the budget hearing that happened yesterday. We got to pay attention to the budget hearing that happened on June 1st. We got to pay attention to the boards that the governor appoints people to. We have to pay attention to the people who are being appointed to these boards. We have to sign up and be election officials, because that is where a lot of things are broken down and taken from us. Steve Bannon, who is from here, is pushing for people to stand at the voting boxes so that they can denigrate the election system and say what we're looking at is not what we see. They're telling us that what we see right in front of us is not facts. We didn't see January 6th as a violation. Those people were patriots. But if we march down the street for our lives to keep black people from being killed by the police, we are rioters and we're destructing our communities. It is our responsibility to educate ourselves and each other on who is representing us and make them work for us.
Paul said y'all feel riled up after hearing her talk. Woo! Good question. Any other questions before we close out this panel from anyone? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, absolutely. Especially when folks are making millions for the same thing.
The facility was clean, you know, food and all of that, and was good, but just to see that, it just never been over.
That's impactful, for sure. Thank you. Yes.
This is a trick. I probably shouldn't say it, but I'm gonna say it anyway because I feel at home. Politics, it's a dirty business. It just is. I'm not saying all politicians are, but the business itself is toxic. It is sad that what I'm about to say is true, but it is. If you're talking to a politician and you want action and you haven't donated money, right? Let's just assume we have not. All right. If you want to talk to a politician and you haven't donated money and you want them to at least hear you and maybe take action, tell that person that you've talked to their opponent. It's sad, but I'm telling you, it is true. That's how bad it is. I'm being straight up with you. I'm being straight. Normally I wouldn't, Paul will tell you, I probably wouldn't say something like that publicly, but it's true. And pay attention during the election cycles when people are running what they're saying. Get them before they get elected. You know, to have your issue at least in their ear. So just want to add that little bit.
Good point. That's good. Good stuff. All right. Any other comments by the panelists or the audience? Okay. All right. Well, panelists, thank you guys so much. Oh my gosh, weren't they awesome? Great insight. Thank you all. I'm going to close out this panel and turn it back over to Paul for the next item on the agenda. Thank you all.